Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. Henry is running one of those annoying errands today that you can only do in person, and he had to do it on short notice, so he's gone for the rest of the day. So he said, while I'm gone, could you please do the video that we were going to do together? And of course I said, sure. Now it won't be the only thing I'm doing this afternoon, obviously, but it's simple. So the first thing is, a friend asked me, said, could you share your carnitas recipe? And I'll be the first one to say I did not invent this. So carnitas is just a roast pork. It's one of those things that people invented to be able to take an inexpensive, slightly fatty cut that can be a little chewy sometimes and make it tender and wonderful. And we really like it, and we did not want to spend 6 or 8 hours a day, roasting all day. So I went online and I searched around to find a recipe. A couple of years ago when Instant Pots first came out, it's all I heard about on Facebook. And I was like, some of these people can barely drive, and yet they're going to use a pressure cooker. Because I recognized right away this was a pressure cooker. Now, I guess it's because they've made it automated that people don't think of it as dangerous. And I certainly don't think of it as any more dangerous than anything else you would do on the stove. But it kind of cracked me up to watch people that, it amazes me that they're allowed to drive, suddenly using a pressure cooker. But when we were looking for a way to do carnitas quickly, the pressure cooker came to mind immediately. I remember when I was a little bitty kid, my mom would use a pressure cooker, and it was a real pressure cooker. It wasn't like this where it's all automated. You just push a couple of buttons and it does everything for you. And it was a way that she could get a meal done quickly. So she was working a full day at the office, and she would come home from work. And she was expected to put a dinner on the table, because that's what women did in the 50s. Anyway, so she would use a pressure cooker as a way to cook food quickly. And I said, well, heck, if Mom can do it, I can. And we use pressure cookers all the time because we do can with a pressure cooker. And that'll be a topic for later. But, so a friend asked me, could you share the recipe? And it's not mine. We haven't really changed it up. But basically, all you're doing is you're setting this guy on Sauté, and you're taking some lean pork roast that you've cut up into chunks, usually about 2-inch chunks, 4 or 5 pounds of it, and you're adding a little bit of salt and pepper if you want. Now, we don't salt almost anything when we cook it. Why? Because if it turns out too salty, you have something that's really not very lovely. So we tend to salt at the end of a process. So I would throw in the pepper here, but I would skip the salt. A little bit of olive oil on the bottom, get it on Sauté, saute it up so that you got a brown, everybody's browned on all sides. And then you add what they call the mojo sauce. Now, it's just a citrus-based sauce. Basically, chicken stock, garlic, orange juice, lime juice, ground cumin, dried oregano, and some more black pepper. Now, they say to add salt. Again, I don't add salt. I add it at the end, because you can always salt something, but you sure as heck have a hard time getting rid of salt. So you're sauteing it in there. You're putting it in here for, I think it's 30 minutes. Yeah, 30 minutes on high pressure. And in 30 minutes on high pressure, you have carnitas, which in my opinion taste just as good as the stuff that we've spent 5 or 6 hours cooking before. Now, the big trick to this is when it comes out, it will be browned, it will look good, it will smell wonderful, but what it really needs for that last little touch is a quick saute in a hot pan. Some people prefer to throw it into an oven and brown it in there. No, I don't want to fire up my oven just for something silly like this. So all we do is toss it into a hot frying pan, sear it a little bit so that you get some nice brown bits on it, and it's ready to go. Yesterday was the day that we did the video on canning pulled pork. So when we can this, all we do is immediately pack it into hot jars and can it in a pressure canner. Now, you do need to make sure that you got enough liquid in your jars, but this produces quite a bit of liquid. If I felt that there wasn't enough liquid in here, I would simply use the same spices that are in the Mojo juice, but we've generally found that this contains the liquid. It's not like when you cook it in a some sort of a Dutch oven or something like that where a lot of the water boils off over time. So you normally wind up with quite a bit of liquid in here, and that was, for us at least, was sufficient to be able to actually can the pulled pork without adding anything else, and the carnitas. So perfect. If it's not enough, just make another, basically a broth using the basic things that were in the Mojo sauce for the carnitas, or in the case of the pulled pork, Henry made a stock from pork scraps, and we used that along with some of the spices. And you want that flavor. We don't like canning in a barbecue sauce for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're using a prepared barbecue sauce, there's a really good chance there's going to be a thickener in there, and that's a no-no. No thickeners in canning ever. The only kind of thickener, I think there's one kind that's approved, and I'm pretty confident it's a GMO product, to be honest. Above all else, I recommend that anyone who's serious about canning, get yourself a Ball Blue Book. Now, it doesn't matter which edition you get. These are the three, I think, a couple of the three most recent ones. And they range in price from, like, I don't know, back when I originally bought this one. The label on that one's long since gone. This was probably about $12 or $15 when I originally bought it. And, of course, as they go on, they get more and more expensive. This one was quite pricey. But we decided it was worth having some of the new stuff. Now, I do not recommend that you use a super old one. So if Grandma has given you some really cool old Ball Blue Book, the pickle recipes and stuff like that will be perfectly fine to use. It'll be just as tasty as they've always been. But do not follow the canning rules, because the canning rules have changed over time. I'm not certain whether the bugs out there that want to make us sick have gotten tougher, or they've just learned a lot more. But I believe fervently in following the rules for proper canning. And that brings us to canning meat. A friend of ours mentioned that they were excited to see us canning meat, and they thought that would be a cool thing to do, and they wanted to make sure they understood how it worked. Meat has to be canned in a pressure canner. It can never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, be canned in a water bath canner or any of the other, and it's going to sound awful, any of the other half-baked techniques that you hear people out there using. Just because it came out right out of the oven and is crispy and wonderful and everything does not mean it's safe if you leave that on the shelf for 6 months. You need to use a pressure canner, and your pressure canner has to be adjusted to take into consideration what altitude you live at. That is super, super important. We are at about 5,820 feet above sea level here, which means we have to use 15 pounds of pressure when we can. That's the top amount of pressure that the canner comes with. I know there is a limitation to how high above sea level you can live. The vast majority of people in the United States live way below that, but it is important to follow the rules. And that's where something like your Ball Blue Book comes in handy. It'll give you that in a very simple chart in the front. Steam pressure canner altitude adjustments. Altitude in feet, 0 to 100 or to 1,000 feet above sea level. You use your weighted gauge at 10. 1,001 to 2,000, weighted gauge at 15, and everything above that is weighted gauge at 15. They stop on this chart at 10,000 feet. So I'm not sure whether you can't do it above 10,000 feet, but you certainly cannot do it with any of the normal techniques. The problem is that the higher above sea level you are, the lower temperature your water boils at. So it's not a dramatic amount. It's only a couple of degrees, but it's enough to make a difference in terms of safety when you're trying to preserve something that's going to sit on the shelf for months and months and months. So, and possibly years if you lose the jar somewhere in your pantry, which never happens to any of us, of course. But very important to understand that. Also, the concept between high acid foods and low acid foods. Something like the Ball Blue Book, and I get nothing from Ball, it's just a safety feature, talks about how acid or alkaline various things are. So, and it tells you why, basically, because it talks about at what point can you start to grow mold and yeast and bacteria. That's all really super important. You don't want to be spending all that time and effort to grow things or buy things, prepare them, cook them, can them, and then they spoil on you. And some of it could be pretty bad. I mean, you could poison yourself. If you follow the rules, super peasy easy. Super peasy easy. Most things like jellies and jams, there's different ways to control these little buggies that I just mentioned, the molds, yeast, bacteria, and stuff like that. And when you're canning, you're usually relying on heat. If you're using fruits, most fruits, a lot of recipes will actually have something like a citric acid in them or a lemon juice or something like that. It'll say bottled lemon juice. Now, why does it say bottled lemon juice? Well, if you've ever used regular old lemons from the grocery store, you know that sometimes you'll be sitting there and it'll be making lemonade and stuff, and it'll be actually pretty sweet. And then the next one you hit, oh, it'll be so tart that it just feels like you're turning your head inside out. That's because the acidity level of lemon juice from lemons is not consistent. The stuff that you buy in a bottle at the grocery store has been stabilized. It has been, they've adjusted the acid level of it so that you're guaranteed it will be a specific acidity. Just like when you buy regular old vinegar that you're going to use for making your pickles, it'll say what the acidity level on there is. And that's why some of the specialty vinegars, like some of the Asian vinegars and stuff like that, are actually a lower acidity level and cannot be used for preserving. It may be fine for a fresh pickle, but it's not good for something that you're going to pickle and stick on the shelf. So this kind of thing is just, I mean, they put it in English. They don't put it in weird words. They don't make it fancy. There's certain things that you do have to accept. But for instance, I think it was this one here, was talking about tomatoes. And I thought they gave an excellent summary of tomatoes and the problem with tomatoes. To me, people think of tomatoes as being acid. And they can be. But as it says here, the amount of natural acid in tomatoes varies depending on the variety, the growing conditions, maturity, and handling. To ensure adequate amounts of acid are present when canning recipes using tomatoes, bottled lemon juice, not fresh, or vinegar labeled 5% acidity is added to acidify the recipe. Now, what we do, what they're talking about here is the people who want to be able to can tomatoes in a water bath instead of a pressure canner. We don't ever try to can them in a water bath. We just do a pressure canner. Neither Henry nor I prefer the flavor of acidified tomatoes. Sometimes our tomatoes will be naturally very acid, and that's just fine. But we don't like the taste of citric acid. We can both taste it. So what we do is we use one of the recipes. It's page 72. I've used this book so much that it's not only dog-eared, but we just use the recipe for Italian tomato sauce, which has other things thrown in it. So it's also got celery and onions and green peppers and stuff like that. And those things are all low acid. So if you add those to tomatoes, there's no way to can that except in a pressure canner. So we just follow the rules that say, get your stuff in a jar, process the pints 15 minutes, quarts 20 minutes, at 10 pounds of pressure in a steam pressure canner. And in our case, it has to be at 15 pounds because we're higher altitude. Super simple, not complicated. If you have doubts about whether something should be considered acid or base, if you have something like this, you can simply look it up. And it'll tell you, can you water bath can this, or does it have to be pressure canned? Just look at the recipes and it'll tell you. When you get into, say, here we go, asparagus. Now, I don't like canned asparagus, but that's a whole nother conversation. Process pints 30 minutes, quarts 40 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure in a steam pressure canner. And you're supposed to know enough that you have to change that if you're higher than that. So that's why something like this is handy. Like I say, I get nothing for ball blue buck. Why risk making a mess when you can just have that as a simple solution? Henry also asked me to give you an update on the sauerkraut. We have been checking it daily, and it is looking awesome. No scum, no nothing, just a little bit of bubbles around the outside edge, which is exactly what we should have. I will take you in there, and I will show you. That's pretty much it for today. I am going to go work on some recipes. It is Friday. Friday is normally pizza day. But this month, we decided that we would do something kind of special and crazy. We love Chinese food. And if you're tuned into New Year's celebrations, this is the Chinese New Year right now. It started on February 1st, and it ends on February 15th. And my goal this month has been to cook something Asian, but usually Chinese, every day through the 15th, basically. And it's been an excuse to get me off my chair and fish up some of the recipes I've been looking at, find some reliable sources. And I recently found a family that I'm very happy with. I'll have to look up their name. Because they're really worth searching through. They are all Chinese, mom and pop. Dad's originally from, he's Cantonese. His wife's from Shanghai. So they have slightly different culinary backgrounds. And she came to the United States when she was 16. I don't remember if he was born here or whether he was born in China. Doesn't make any difference. Basically, they have melded their traditions together, and they've got a couple of adult children now who contribute to their recipes, and they've basically gone and they've run Chinese restaurants. They know what's authentic, they know what's not authentic, and not authentic doesn't make it bad. You just have to say, okay, this is a restaurant version. This is not you won't find this in China. It's like I was looking for mushu pork the other day, and what I found was that the authentic mushu pork from, I think it was Canton, but I'd have to check, in China, it's actually made with cucumbers. Which I was like, okay, I'm not a cucumber fan, so that was kind of weird. But we'll try it sometime this summer and see what we think about it. It might cover up the taste of cucumbers, and then I could eat cucumbers. Because this recipe had none of the things I remembered in my mushu. And the big thing that it was totally missing was it was missing the fact that there were always dried daylily buds in the good versions that we got in California. So I was like, okay, if this recipe doesn't have the daylily buds, then it's not the recipe that we liked. So I looked, and sure enough, the mushu chicken recipe that they had online was the one with daylily buds. So when I get done here today, one of my jobs is to get onto Amazon and order some dried daylily buds, because we don't have, we might have 2 daylilies in the yard. So I can't exactly count on them to provide enough dried daylily buds for us to be able to eat. So I'll be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because we will be coming back. We will be doing lots, and I will take you to the kitchen. See you there. Okay, here we are in the kitchen, and there is our crock. Let's see if I can lift this lid off without dropping it. And here we go. I could see a little bit of bubbles around the edge. It's developing that distinctly sauerkrauty smell. There is no mold yet, and I am glad about that. So, yep, it smells like sauerkraut to me.